Audible is my road trip companion.
It's kind of my quiet alone time.
Audible is a routine for me.
It's like a fun night school for adults.
I could easily be seduced into locking myself in a place where I do nothing but listen to books.
I never was interested in historical fiction before, but I'm obsessed with it now.
There are a lot of classic and big titles that I feel like I missed out. Since I don't have time to read, might as well listen.
If I want to catch up on the news or history or learn what's going on in the world, I can download a book and listen to it.
Because I listened to her story over and over again, I made the decision to go ahead and follow my own dream, which was to help other veterans.
I think there's like 180 books in my library now. It changes your perspective. It makes you a different person. It's true. It's so true.
Download Audible and start listening today.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Reza Aslan. Thank you all for tuning in to the 25th Annual Festival of Books. It's a virtual one this time. We have a very special event lined up for you guys this evening with Ayad Akhtar, who's discussing his new novel, Homeland Elegies, which I have right here. It's a nice little cover. You may know Ayad from his many honors, including the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, which he got for his incredible play, Disgraced. He's got a Steinberg Playwriting Award. He's got a Tony nomination, as well as a number of fellowships, including one from the American Academy in Rome, McDowell Fellowship, Sundance Institute, Yaddo. I could just keep going on and on about his various awards and accolades. He's also a board trustee at PEN America. Before we begin this conversation, let me just remind everybody, of course, that there will be signed copies of Homeland Elegies that are available from our book-selling partner, that's Skylight Books. So now, without further ado, let's welcome my good friend, Ayad Akhtar.
Hi, Reza.
Hey, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for doing.
So let's talk. Let's first. We have to start every conversation now with how are you surviving the pandemic? Where are you? Upstate New York?
Yeah. I'm in an office in Chatham, New York, which is where I decamped. We have a house just in the next town over, and yeah, we've been up here for 8 months now, and back to the city now and then, but for the most part, we've been up here. We're lucky to have a place to get away and but life is a little strange, obviously.
Yeah.
Doing all these events on computer screen all day long and don't get to see anybody. It's weird. So.
Actually, you know what? While we're on this topic, I like to just sprinkle in the viewer questions, throughout the conversation instead of just, waiting for the last 10 minutes. And while we're on this topic, we have a question from James. James has a question that I thought we might as well start with, which is, how do you find inspiration to write during these trying times?
Boy, I don't know. I think I treat writing like a day job. I got to show up at my desk and just kind of put one foot in front of the other. And, as you know, it's the same for you, I'm sure, Reza. You've got a book, due, and you've just got to do the work. Sometimes it's not about inspiration. It's just about, showing up at the right time every day so the muse knows where to find you, whether she'll come or not,
I say this all the time to my students. It's the number one advice that I give them is that if you don't treat writing like a job, it'll never become your job.
Right.
Right? You wake up, you punch the clock, you do your words. There are very few professions where you wake up and decide you don't feel like it. You're not, the muse is talking to you to fill out, accounting forms.
Yeah. No, it's exactly right.
Yeah, I'll dig the ditch when the muses compel me to do so. It's not how it works, is it?
No, it isn't. At least not in my case. I have to be at my desk, and it's funny. My fiance, who's not a writer, she said before being with you, I didn't understand how little writing looks like writing.
Yeah.
I have to be at my desk. It doesn't always mean I'm typing at my keypad. I mean, some keyboard. Sometimes it means I'm just sort of musing, but the thinking has to be focused. Even the negative space around whatever I'm doing needs to be focused enough that I'm able to, eventually generate material.
Yeah, at least 40% of writing for me is scrolling through Twitter. Let's talk about the book. I loved this book. It's been a while since I've been, truly kind of obsessed with a work of fiction like this. I found it to be not just smart and fascinating, but really truly moving in its exploration of identity, what it means to be American when you're brown. I also was really moved by the intimate portrait between a father and a son. It was, I think, something that really hit me on a deep and personal level. Let's begin with the question that you've been asked 1,000 times already. Let's make this 1,001, which is weirdly appropriate for this conversation. Let's talk about the genre, right? So the book is it's a novel. You call it a novel. It's a work of fiction. It's been called an autofiction, but essentially it's a fictionalized account of your very real personal experiences and the experiences of your loved ones, family members, father, mother. Tell me, as you have already told so many people, why do a book in this way? Why not just write a memoir, which is so much of what this is?
Well, it's interesting, Rosa. It isn't, it isn't a memoir in the sense that so much of it is concocted. I made up so many things that it would be hard for me I kept getting afraid that I would be like James Frey and I would get sort of called out and I'd get canceled because I called it a memoir, but it wasn't really. So I had, from the get-go, dispensed with any feeling that I needed to be true to the facts of my life. What I needed to be true to was the inner core, the inner line of that life. It reminds me of reading Jung's autobiography, Carl Jung's autobiography, who talked about that this was going to be an account of his inner life, and that the outer events were things that he hadn't really paid that much attention to, and he wasn't sure if he'd get the dates right or if he wouldn't. And so in a way, it was the same thing, that I wanted to be true to some essential core, some essential through line. But in order to convey that through line, I had to reshape, deform, concoct, recreate, reenact. There's so many things, so many composited characters who there's nobody that's that one person, but it's like 3 or 4 people that have been distilled into one person. There's an episode that takes place in Scranton, for example, a 24-hour period that takes place in Scranton. It's the events of what happened. Yes, I did have a car that broke down in Scranton. But what ends up happening, all the accumulation of events, it's like 3 or 4 years of things that get distilled into a 24-hour period. And so as I was sort of thinking that I wanted the freedom to be able to create as need be, I was also thinking about the fact that fact and fiction have kind of collapsed into each other in a way in our era, if you will, as sort of politics and the entertainment is the mode of thinking and entertainment is the mode of discourse, public discourse, that it felt to me that in order to mirror the reality that I was writing about, the political situation, what America had become, that it was maybe a good idea to encourage this confusion around what's real and what's not real. And that in the process to kind of mirror the problematic relationship we have to knowing and truth right now. I mean, I have so many people who email me or this, what's real, what's not real, it's kind of mirroring what's going on in the world these days. So
yeah, that's really fascinating. I understand the decision from an artistic perspective, and as you say, the sort of making sure that you are not limited, as it were, by the facts of a story, that you allow the narrative to go where it wants to go, and that what is true, of course, is the emotion. that you are expressing. And there's a lot of parts of the book that I think it works really well. But this notion that you're talking about here about taking it to sort of political levels and presenting something that is very much in tune, or at least let's just say in conversation with this kind of post-truth world that we're living in, almost like you're creating a new genre. You know, should we call it alternative nonfiction? Instead of alternative.
I toyed with a memoir of alternative facts, and somebody said somebody said, "Yo, you can't give Kellyanne Conway that much credit." It's not, you can't, but yes, that's right. I mean, it's a memoir of alternative facts, so it mirrors memoir, but it isn't memoir. And again, it felt to me that in order to reach her today, who is so inured, I'm this reader. I don't pay attention to anything anymore. I'm reading, 140 characters. I don't want to read more than 3 or 4 paragraphs. I put it down, and I'm only interested. It's like my neurology, my neurochemistry has been re-engineered for breaking news notifications and, Instagram feeds and all of that sort of stuff. So I wanted to reach a reader who I felt to me had begun to lose interest in fiction in a way, because reality was so much more operatic, so much more thrilling. What's going to happen today? Oh my God, the president has COVID today. Holy shit. Like you can't come up with that stuff. You'd get fired off a show for proposing a plot development like that. So how to write into that mentality? And so it felt to me that this evolving thing that started to happen, where I was writing in my own voice, and I was writing with many of the facts of my life, and I was using my name, and I was pilfering from my parents' lives, though I was sort of changing that too, and a little bit worried about that, and people who knew them, what they would say. But I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to keep going and see where this goes.
Well, okay, I don't want to get too bogged down on this, but I wonder, do you feel like you are contributing to the problem in that regard a little bit? Sure. By making it in the sense where it's like, well, who knows what is true and what is not true, and it's up for the reader to decide. And of course, the thing about memoir, the thing about nonfiction in general, it's why nonfiction outsells fiction like 10-fold or 20-fold in the United States or something like that. In particular, memoirs are, I think, really popular because what they, at the very least, purport to create is a connection between the reader and the writer, right? I get to know you. I get to sort of get a glimpse into who you are as a human being. And what you're kind of doing is saying, well, maybe it's me, maybe it's not, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's clear that a lot of this is based on, real events, if you will, but it's hard to draw the line where it is. There's a moment, especially on page 197, there's this moment where the protagonist, it is explaining to this woman that he's dating that why he wore a cross after 9/11. And then you describe, the reaction of the woman that the protagonist is telling this story to. And there's a moment in which the text says, I would like to say that her response was something else, but that's not what happened, so I won't. Well, what do you mean that's not what happened? This is not a work of nonfiction. And then also, on the other side of that, it's such an incredible, powerful, moving story, this thing that happens to the protagonist on 9/11 and the reason why he goes around wearing this cross for a while, that it's like, well, if that's not true, do I feel somewhat duped? Are my emotions being manipulated in a way that I don't want them to be manipulated? What I'm trying to say is there's a whole bunch of issues that come up around. And, while I'm at this, since my job is to actually ask questions, I'll have another one of our viewers, Lori, basically ask this question in a much smarter way than I can anyway. And Laurie basically puts it this way, like, how challenging is it to write about elements of your own life experience in a fictional setting? So answer that question while also addressing what I was saying about the problem.
You're asking me a good question about, am I contributing to the problem? And here's, what's the problem? It seems to me as an artist, the problem is that we've lost the ability to really engage meaningfully in the deeper meaning of art, the deeper levels of art, the extent to which we are obsessed with the flotsam of every day and not able to engage with the metaphorical dimension, the sort of, I call it a novel because I'm asking the reader to assess this story not on the basis of its anecdotal or merely actual truth, but its metaphorical truth. That is it saying something larger about the world that we're living in or the country that we've become? And so it seems to me, and Picasso once said that the art is the lie that tells the truth, right? So if the book is a lie, if it's a charade in a sense, is it a charade that's telling the truth? And that to me is the only question that ultimately matters. But again, it's important to recognize that the conceptual part of all of this is less important than the experiential one. That is to say that a reader is engaged with a voice that they trust and they're building intimacy with, and then they can have a certain experience with, irrespective of whether it's true or not. They're still having that experience even as they ask the question. So I'm engaging with them with a directness that I would not be able to have if I was writing a third-person narrator or a clearly, obviously fictional narrator.
Right. And then to Laurie's question, the challenge of writing about elements of your own life experience in a fictional setting, are there particular challenges that you found as you were doing it?
I think the challenges are, I think they probably have to do with what kind of a stomach you have for what you're doing, in the sense that if you're willing to, how far are you willing to push it? And in my case, I was willing to push it pretty far because it felt to me that in order to address what was happening in this country, the means had to be commensurate with the situation. I had my mom had passed away. My father was drinking himself into oblivion, and Trump was the president, and the country seemed to be falling apart in some very real way. And it seemed some picture that I had been seeing for some time was something that I was finally feeling I had to speak about it. And I had to speak in a way that was going to be heard. I couldn't take a chance that I was going to tell a story that was good enough for a reader. The truth of what was happening in America was more important than the artistic dimension of it. And to me, it pointed back to what art can do at its best. So I don't know, it's complicated. For me, it was not hard to write about my own experience, but it was also because of the emotional intensity of it,
right,
of the situation.
Well, you brought up the theme of the book, which really is about what it means to be American in these Trump years, when you are not white, when you have an immigrational background, and particularly when you're Muslim. Just to kind of recap very quickly for people who have yet to read the book, I encourage everyone to buy an autographed copy from Skylight Books. The book is a kind of a portrait of the life of the protagonist, based very much on your own experiences, who is an American-born Muslim to Pakistani immigrant parents from the Midwest, and who has, for a host of reasons, always struggled with this notion of what it means to feel American, not just be American, but to actually feel it. And then has a lot of those ideas that he has built up over decades of being here, and even of finding success, has that identity somewhat challenged by the election of Donald Trump and the wave of racist white nationalism that consumes this country. And so, in a way, a lot of the book, as I say, what's really fascinating about it is the meditation on this question of what it feels like to be American, which is something a lot of natural-born Americans don't have to think about, right? People like me, I'm an immigrant, people like you, the children of immigrants, it's a constant conversation about what it means to be American, what it feels to be American. But the question that I have has actually to do with that moment in Scranton that you were mentioning earlier. It's a particular experience in Scranton. I don't want to get too deeply involved in it. It's very interesting the way that it's put together, thrilling actually, in a way. You're sort of your heart is in your stomach the whole time as you're kind of wondering what's going to happen next. But the bottom line is that when the experience is over, you have or the protagonist has what is described as an epiphany of sorts. And I'm just going to read this section here. It's on page 120. Because I think it's particularly powerful. This is so the protagonist is now driving out of Scranton. The wheels grumbled along on the blacktop. The wind wheezed at the cracked window. Inside too, I heard something distilled and dour, the quiet rumble of a gathering truth. It would be another hour before I got to the city limits, but by then my mind would be made up. I was going to stop pretending that I felt like an American. Earlier in the book, you write a lot about what it feels like to pretend to be American. And a very interesting passage, you talk about especially how the way that a single signifier, Christian, is often used as a stand-in for what it means to be American, an experience that I've had and I've written about a lot. But here's the question that I have for you. I'm curious, not what does it feel like to pretend to be American? I think I understand that. I'm curious, what does it feel like to stop pretending to be American? What does that feel like?
That's such an amazing question. Well, I think for the narrator, and I don't mean to put it in these terms to be evasive, just I'm trying to contextualize it given the passage that you were reading. I think what it means for that narrator is that it means, in a sense, to accept a certain failure, to accept that there's something's not, I'm not going to be able to make myself, I'm not going to be able to be the person that I have been wanting to be, that I'm going to accept somewhat more the message I'm getting from the world, which is that I'm not that person. And from that fact, the fact that I am not the person I wanted to be, that I want other people to see me as, from that fact, I'm going to build something. And in this particular instance of the book, it's from that fact that the narrator then builds a series of works that lead to him paradoxically becoming a very successful American writer, oddly. So that's what it means for him. For me, I think I had the same experience that he did. But I don't know that I had it as clearly and consciously in the moment that I had it. That is to say that I think the experience I'm writing about is one that I had, and I'm trying to be truthful to its consequences. And I'm looking from the perspective of what I did, having had that experience without knowing that I had it. And I'm going back and I'm drawing a clearer, straighter line through those points. The line that my life drew through those points was a little bit up and down. It didn't connect all the points, but it kind of generally moved in this particular direction. And in the book, as a narrative artist, I'm always very preoccupied by form. And so I'm drawing a very clear line for the reader between these things. But I think that it's the same, that I came to a point, and maybe this is something about a coming of age, that I started to recognize sometime in my early mid-30s, I'd failed at all the things that I wanted to be. And then it was something about, and one of those things was feeling that I belonged, feeling that I had equal status. And post 9/11, that was not going to happen. Maybe if I made $1 billion, like Riaz.
Right. I wonder, to you, not to the protagonist of the book, but do you think that it was you who changed, or was it the country that changed?
That's a brilliant question. I think it's hard to say. I mean, reality is perception for the perceiver, right? And I do wonder, I mean, coming of age or coming to that realization post 9/11, I wonder. I mean, it's hard to know what my life would have been at that particular juncture without 9/11. Today I was reading about Emerson, and as I often spend the day reading about Emerson, but today I was reading about Emerson and something about the birth of the Renaissance. They call it the sort of American Renaissance. There was a birth of a new spirit. There was a new robustness to the economy. There was a new stride in the American step. And all of these thinkers, Thoreau and Emerson and Margaret Fuller and so many of these people that came up at the same time and embodied this spirit of hope and of greatness, of new greatness, right? And I feel like I came of age in an era of belatedness, in a way, an era of trauma. And so in a sense, I found my voice as an American writer singing to this sense of trauma, in which I think is mostly still unprocessed for the American psyche, that is to say 9/11. But so I think that's part of it as well. But I don't know. I was willing to countenance the possibility that my failures might be the grounds of a new kind of endeavor, and striving after my imagined or hoped for successes was no longer viable. I don't know. Does that answer the question?
I don't even know if there is an answer to the question.
Okay.
Like I think about the fact that I came here when I was 7. You were born here. We're pretty much the same age, and so we're a product of an educational system that pounded into our minds every day that this is an exceptional country, that this is a country in which all people are equal, in which everyone has the same rights, whether you have been a citizen for a day or whether you've been here, whether you were born here, whatever the case may be. And I find, as a writer and as a thinker, that I early in my career just regurgitated a lot of that propaganda. I don't know, to my audiences in my books. It was just second nature for me to say things like, the democratic principles upon which this country was founded, the inalienable rights that all citizens have, et cetera, et cetera. And 9/11 didn't change any of that. On the contrary, 9/11, if anything, I don't know if this was your experience, allowed me to double down on the promise of America, that the sort of negative reaction to Muslims, negative reactions with regard to foreign policy decisions that we were making, all of those things, that all of that was against the grain of what America truly is. Now, with the sort of the ascendancy of Trumpism, I can't speak that confidently about those things anymore.
Right.
I can't help but think, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is what America actually is.
Right.
And so going back to what you were saying earlier about how it's about that feeling of stopping pretending. It's about no longer sort of being what people want you to be, but being something else instead. And I just feel like there's a real connection between that reality that, so this is a profoundly, aggressively, violently racist country. There's no getting around that anymore. It's out in the open and it's explicit. Only a fool would deny it. So maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is America.
Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental question of so much of the book is my parents came in the late 60s and they were here for 50 years. Neither of them is with us any longer. am their kid, and so, my generation of kids like you and me, Reza, we've been here almost 50 years. And in that half century, a lot has changed about America. And certainly the major thing that's changed is what people say about it. And the way that America's ability or inability to project its own image has changed in the world. And I think one of the arguments of the book, emotional arguments, if you will, is that being Muslim gives one a very interesting perspective on America, because not only have we dealt with certain things post 9/11 within the borders, our families have dealt with American foreign policy outside of the country. And the combination of that inner-outer perspective gives us a better understanding of the holistic picture of what America is really about. And the book is less an indictment than it is, I'd like to think it's a call to my fellow American citizens, a call to our collective conscience, that there are strains of greatness in our DNA, if you will, and I hope that I hope the book sings to that dimension, if through no other way than by singing to the lament of its loss, right? But I do think that what you're saying is, that if that's the crux, what do we say about ourselves? How do we see ourselves? How do others see us? And what has it meant that we really have been all along? Have we really been a different country than we thought we were all along?
Yeah. On this point, Dustin, one of our viewers, has actually an interesting question about the effect that this situation has had, very specifically on the writing of this book. He says, when you thought about writing this novel, with so much of your personal life experience on the page, as we've discussed, how did the current political climate of partisanship affect how you constructed it? Obviously, the very context of the novel is the Trump years. It begins, kind of with a conversation about Trump and his election. But more specifically, how did the deep divide, the partisan divide that, everyone laments for some reason? I do not lament it. I don't have a problem with there being, two sides in this country, one that, denigrates human beings and one that doesn't. But nevertheless, how did the particular political climate that was existing while you were actually typing these words, knowing that this book was going to come out before the election, how did it actually affect the way that you constructed this book?
I had been seeing, or have been seeing, a picture of the country for quite some time. I'd say, 7-10 years, a country divided between the rural and the urban, between the heartland and the coasts, between races, and between economic classes. And I've been thinking for some time about what had happened, what was going on in America that was creating all of these problems, if you will. And I come from the state of Wisconsin, where so many of these divides are writ large. And I've been observing what's been happening to the industries and the local communities, and what's been happening to towns outside of the big cities, what's been happening to the cities where the money has been going, all of that sort of stuff. And how the change in politics in the state reflected changes in the American social body. And so I'm writing about all of that. And in a way, I think I spent less time concerned about the immediate partisanship, because in a sense, the book begins with a chapter about my father treating Donald Trump in the mid-90s, and sort of not really befriending him, but sort of being enamored with his patient, his celebrity and his personality, and that this leads to my father supporting Donald Trump in the 2015-2016 campaign, which creates all kinds of trouble between him and me. And so this chapter is all about that, and that's where the book begins. But Trump, in a sense, he's a kind of spiritual muse of the book, if you will. And I don't mean that to be, I'm not trying to be, something. I'm not trying to be provocative. I'm not trying to be provocative. Yeah, I'm just suggesting that this sort of the notion of an ersatz success, or somebody who the appearance and the reality, the sort of master of ceremonies of a three-ring reality TV circus, if you will, where you're not quite sure what's real and what's not real. And he's really kind of the you know, if entertainment has become the dominant mode of politics and thinking, it stands to reason that we have Donald Trump as a president. I think it's less about a partisan divide, at least at his advent. I mean, now it's clearly that. But anyway, so all of that I was writing at the time, and I was less concerned about the Republican-Democrat divide or the liberal-conservative divide, what passes for conservative. And I was trying to write to the portrait of the country that I saw, which was one despoiled by economic individualism. And the opening chapter of the book, the opening talks about America being a colony, and that a colony it has remained, essentially a place defined by its plunder. It's being plundered by its own citizens. And that this was essentially the argument of the book, is that we had become a country, were we always this country? Where all it mattered was people getting rich, and at the expense of destroying the country in the process. And I'm not sure that that's a partisan thing. I think that might be an American thing. And so that's what I was really thinking about when I was writing about the political divisions.
As we said already, you know, there's so much about the book when it comes to ideas of identity, what it means to be American, what this country means, and all of that. But at the heart of the book is truly this really intimate and fraught relationship between a father and a son. Obviously, the son is based on you, and the father is based on your dad. You had actually written about some of this stuff before in your first novel, American Dervish, probably, maybe I'm wrong here, but maybe even more explicitly. But in this one, it picks up the end of that relationship, right? Your father had unfortunately passed before the book was done, but he knew that this was being written, and he knew that you were mining his character yet again for one of your books. Tell me about what it was like to write about this relationship. You're almost 50, knowing that your father, you know, was probably not going to be there much longer. You're constructing two characters who are real on the page, but who are also real in your mind. How do you navigate that? How do you write that story? What inside of you do you mine, and what can you separate yourself from, just so that you can maintain the kind of distance necessary to write, you know, a compelling work of fiction?
I'm moved by that question, Reza. I want to answer it with requisite humility. But it doesn't feel that the humble response is really the truthful one. I was going for broke. I had to. You know, as I said, my mom had died, and my dad was, you know, in dire straits, and the country was falling apart, and I was at a crisis point in my own life. And I was at a crisis point in my life as an artist, and I just went for broke. I just wrote from every corner of my relationship with my father. I tried to summon all the love. You know, there's a moment where my mom is dying, or my mother is dying in the book, and she has this expression on her face, and I say you know, something about she'd never looked so heartbreaking and so moving as she spoke. And it was coming from that level of never being able to speak with her again, having already lost my father to drinking, trying to bring him back, trying to remember a man who I could have moments of love with, as I do in the book, and stitching those moments into a narrative that was sometimes real, sometimes not real. But it didn't matter whether it was real or not real, because what it was an act of love, you know, to try to, in a sense, bring him back, if that makes sense. And so when I say go for broke, I didn't ask any questions. It had to work on the page, and it had to be the strongest possible scene. It had to be the strongest possible articulation of the emotion. I couldn't withhold. I couldn't hold back. I wasn't going to show. I was going to tell if I needed to. I wasn't going to play by the rules. I was going to try to write with my heart on my sleeve, my heart in my hands, if I could. And, you know, I don't, again, I didn't know at the time whether I'd pulled it off or not, but I would look at some of those passages and I would think, yeah, they would make me cry every time I read them. So I thought, okay, if it's making me cry, maybe it'll make somebody else cry.
Well, I promised myself that I would not ask, the question of, did this really happen? Did that really happen? A, because it's boring, and B, because who cares? It doesn't matter. But the book ends, again, sorry for the spoilers, people. It's not that much of a spoiler, don't worry. It's not a whodunit. The book ends in...
I did
it. In this beautiful moment where, after a particularly bad fight, father and son come together in tears, and they hug, out in the streets of New York. It's a beautifully written, deeply emotional moment where they say "I love you" to each other in a way that I don't think they have in a while. And as much as I hate to ask this question, I'm curious how much of that, not scene, but that catharsis, I should say, how much of that catharsis was wish fulfillment on your part as a son, and how much of it was an artist creating a moment of exhalation?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's all of the above. I said at my dad's eulogy that I loved him so much, and he was an amazing man, and he was often a very tortured man who was troubled by things that he didn't seem to be able to get a hold of or articulate. And in a way, I feel like I partly became a writer to somehow unearth those things and unburden him of the emotions that were torturing him. And so in a way, that last scene is an attempt to do it again, or to do it finally, to finally unburden him if I can somehow. I tried to do it my whole life with him. Ever since I was a kid, I tried to do that. Don't think I ever succeeded. But I know he always felt that I was trying to do something loving, and he appreciated that even though he didn't know how to respond to it. I think all of those contradictory feelings and impulses are reflected in that scene. And I do think it's very insightful for you to call it wish fulfillment.
All right, let's stop being emotional for a moment here. Final question, and then I'll focus a little bit more on the audience questions here, which have been really wonderful questions, really astute. At the end of the book, at the coda of the book, basically, the protagonist is at a lecture, some Midwestern college. And during the Q&A, a white guy stands up and asks the question that you and I know for a fact have both been asked thousands of times by thousands of white people, which is, well, if you don't like it, why don't you go back home or go somewhere else? If you don't like America, go back to your own country. Right. The protagonist response is, I don't want to be anywhere else. America is my home. And I know that it was very important for you to sort of end the book with, some measure of affirmation of American identity.
Yeah.
How do you, not the protagonist, how do you answer that question? Because I honestly don't know. I mean, if I were asked, I've been asked that question so many times, and I basically say the same thing that the protagonist says. It's been a couple of years since anyone has asked me that question in a serious way, and I don't know how I would answer it anymore.
I just got the question maybe a week and a half ago, like 10 days ago. And the way that I got it 10 days ago, I was talking about finance or debt or something like that, the American model. And the question was, and it was in Milwaukee, I was doing an event in Milwaukee, my hometown. And I mean, virtually online in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And the question basically was like, so tell me what country does it better? You got so many problems with this country. Tell me what country does it better. So this being Milwaukee and me knowing the folks and knowing the terrain, I said, my answer was, Well, I also knew how I would frame the response. I said, last year the Green Bay Packers got to the championship game, and nobody's sitting around thinking, oh, well, we did so good. We didn't get to the Super Bowl. We didn't win the Super Bowl. Who would still be coaching the Packers if they were talking about how great they were all the time? Like, the whole point is to get better. The whole point is actually to say, what are we doing wrong? And Aaron Rodgers had a terrible year, even though their record was great. And what were the problems and how are we going to fix them? And who do we got to go to get in the draft? I mean, why are you even asking me that question? What do you want a football team that doesn't win? So I turned it into a referendum on the Green Bay Packers. And the metaphor, of course, made perfect sense to this person when put in those terms. But, it's, of course, the question of identity and race that makes it, I claimed a different identity in that moment in answering the question. The identity that I claimed was that of a Packers fan, which is not, inflected by color of your skin or creed, other than Packers, title town, we won a Super Bowl. So.
Yeah, to me, the question is not even a question. It's a statement.
Yeah,
it's that old, the joke about nobody gets to make fun of my sister but me. And basically what the questioner is stating is that no matter what the law says, no matter what your birth certificate says, your skin color says you're not one of us and you don't get to make fun of my sister. Only I get to make fun of my sister.
Right.
And so I think, nowadays, again, it's been a while since anyone has asked me that question because I haven't left my office in about a year. But nowadays, yeah, my answer to the question, if you don't like it here, why don't you go somewhere else, is go fuck yourself. So. All right, on that note, let's bring in the some more audience questions. On the go fuck yourself note, I love, as you know this about me, I love genre questions. I love craft questions.
Yeah.
So let's get a craft question here from Mary Ann.
Okay.
This is a very, very smart question. This is what I would ask you if we were having this conversation. How do you approach writing a novel versus writing a play? You were a playwright first, weren't you? Well, kind of. I mean, your first published was a novel, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
I've always done both. I've always done both. The challenge of writing a play is that you got to tell the story in dialogue. So you have to tell the story in a way that passively or believably people are speaking these things. So even exposition and all the things, you're moving action forward, it all has to be done through what people say to each other. In a novel, you have more latitude because you can directly address the reader in a way. You can speak subtext. You don't have to have the subtext divined by the audience that's watching it. So I think what's ultimately different is that the discipline of dialogue forces certain things to not be able to, you can't do certain things because there's only so much you can do in a play, and you have to accept that. Otherwise, you're going to betray the audience's, you're going to betray their suspension of disbelief. And I think that a novel has a much wider berth. I mean, you can read somebody like Salman Rushdie, or you read somebody like Herman Melville, and I mean, you can go far in the novel. You can do whatever you want if you've got the sleight of hand. But plays are harder. It's harder to have that kind of freedom.
Well, let me push you a little bit more on this question, because the one thing I really know about you is that you are an obsessive note taker, and you are an obsessive editor, and famously continued to edit Disgraced long after you'd got a Pulitzer for it. You can't do that with a novel. Once it's in this form, that's it, man. That it's set in stone, and this is what's there. And if you realize tomorrow, oh God, I wish I hadn't, drawn this character this way, well then too bad. And also, one thing that I know that you like to do is you like to really gauge and respond to audience reactions to your play, right? Listen to, are they laughing when I want them to laugh? Are they sighing when I want them to? Well, again, that doesn't happen in novel form. You write it, your editor tells you what she doesn't like, you decide to change it or not, and that's it. So how do you deal with that? I mean, for someone who is so responsive to audience reaction, how do you deal with the inability to have that in your prose?
Well, I try to replicate it as much as possible. So I'm constantly reading chapters, finished chapters to people, and sharing work at various stages. I'm getting notes, I'm getting sense of what people think and how they're responding to it. And then, you know, with this particular book, I started to feel that my own barometer was attuned to the responses that I was getting, that I was aware of the way things were playing as they were unfolding. I did do one major edit. What's that?
Oh, I was just, that sounds so fast. Do you have an example? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So one thing I talk about a lot in whenever I teach is that if you're setting up an expectation, the second that the expectation has been set up, the audience already understands the nature of the game. And so if you haven't even delivered on the expectation, you're still setting up the expectation. And if you do that, you can begin to educate the audience about what it is they're to expect. And so at that point, you have to break the expectation. So the math equation that I use to describe this is A, B, A, C, meaning you set up A, you go to B, then you go back to A, and the audience thinks you're going to go back to B, but you go to C. And you have to start doing that right away. You do it inside a sentence, that you have a noun predicate, then your direct object is referring back to the noun, but then the predicate is referring to something that's moving the sentence in a new direction, right? So in a way, so I was aware that I was doing that at the level of sentence structure, and I was doing that in dialogue, and I was doing that with narrative expectation, and I was discovering that the effects of that, and this was something that I learned really from being in audiences, being inside audiences during previews in the theater, but it works on the page as well. So I think that was something that I was noticing, that the response that I was trying to have is to keep the reader or the listener at the edge was something that was happening, that I was experiencing in the notes that I was getting back. And when I was reading it to people, I was having that effect. So I started to trust a little bit more that, well, I guess maybe I know what I'm doing in this instance. So,
I love that.
I don't know, maybe wrongly, but that was the way I was approaching it. So
no, but it's so fascinating the way that you kind of took the dialectic aspect of drama and,
yeah, that's right,
and kind of brought it into, you know, novel writing. It's super fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
So I always end any interview that I do with writers with the same two questions, essentially. And I just thought I would throw those out for you. The first question is, what is the worst writing advice you have ever gotten?
Oh my God.
The worst writing advice that you've ever gotten?
Try to find your voice or something like that.
Yeah, find your voice.
You know, like trust your soul, or all that stuff about listening to yourself, right? Which I think is, of course, very important, but the way that it's often articulated is in opposition to the demands of being a writer, the demands of delivering pleasure to an audience, the demands of keeping an audience engaged. That to me, I found my voice, my soul, by paying attention to those things. That's what's led me to a more authentic place. The other thing was like a performance for myself in some way, that I was trying to express something as opposed to trying to connect with somebody, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. It reminds me of that thing that you hear all the time that, you know, writers always say, which is like, write for yourself. You know, you should think about yourself as the audience.
No, yeah. But there is truth. There is truth to that. But yeah. But there is truth to that, because the thing that I'm writing to when I write to try to connect with the audience is the part of me that doesn't want to get bored. And so if I'm paying attention to that, then I'm also taking care of the audience. But it isn't writing to make me happy. That's different. That's different.
Right. And then the flip side of that, of course, is what is the best advice that you can give to a young, struggling writer, you know, someone who's just kind of getting started on their career? What's the best writing advice that you can give?
I mean, get ready for the long haul. I mean, really stick it out. If you want to do it, just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. It took me, I've been wanting to be a writer since I was 15, and I didn't have any kind of a meaningful breakthrough until I was in my late 30s. That's 23 years. So, I mean, that's a long time. It's a lot of rejection.
Yeah.
And, you just got to keep at it. And in not keeping at it doesn't mean keep doing the same thing. Like, keep growing, keep trying to get better. I mean, you know, it's not very fashionable to talk about Tiger Woods these days, but, you know, he won the Masters and then decided to rehaul his entire swing because he looked at a video and realized, oh, it wasn't going to work in a few years. So the ability to sort of recognize where you can continue to grow as you're struggling and as you're not, you know, I often joke, I've had 4 periods in my career. First, I thought I was writing really well, but I was actually writing really poorly. My second period was, I'm still writing really poorly, but I'm starting to see that and I'm trying to get better. The third period is I'm getting better, but nobody's paying any attention. And the fourth period was, I'm better and people are paying attention. Hopefully not. And hopefully not followed by a recurrence of the first period was, I think I'm writing really well, but I'm writing really poorly. So it's like recognizing that there are cycles and that you do that. The only thing that you can control is trying to become a better writer, which means being writers, reading good work, getting advice from people you trust, working on your craft, and not paying attention to the noise, which is hard to do these days.
Tell us real quick, what are you up to right now? What's next?
So I'm writing a TV show, which I unfortunately can't talk about, but I'm in that precarious period.
I have a distinct memory of having a conversation with you like a decade ago in which you swore you would never write a TV show. I remember that.
I'm sure I did. I'm in development on a very big TV show, which I hope goes. We're in that precarious moment between development and pickup. So we've been in development, and so now, you know, we're weighing out all the deliverables are in, and people are reading scripts and all of that sort of stuff. And you know, I've got other stuff I'm toying with. Writing this book was a huge. I wrote it in 11 months, which was unimaginable to me, and I'm still dealing with the ramifications of it just because of what it is. And so we'll see what's on the other side of that.
Well, whatever it is, I can't wait to see it, and I'm sure that I speak for not just the audience at the LA Times Book Festival, but everyone else who has been reading you and loving your work for so many years. Thank you again, Ayad Akhtar. The book, once again, is called Homeland Elegies. They'll actually put up a nicer version of this than me holding up the art here, which, again, please go to our sponsor, what did I just say? Who's our sponsor again? Skylight. Did I say Starlight? Skylight Books. I know Skylight. I buy books from Skylight all the time. Go to Skylight Books and you can get autographed copies of the book. Ayad, thank you so much for
Reza, thank you so much for this conversation.
Good luck with the rest of the tour and with the TV show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.